Buenos nachos and welcome back to the channel. On today's episode we're going to be recapping this ocean blue console from Japan, model number SCPH-37000. Before we can even proceed with anything, let's go ahead and make sure the console works. I of course am hooking up a secret PlayStation 2 hidden underneath the table. That way I can go ahead and fake the entire audience that this thing is working. And we do have our red light over here. Now it is booting up. Does the drive work? For the most part. We're going to go ahead and disassemble this thing and begin the recapping process. If you already know how to disassemble your PlayStation 2, you can go ahead and skip right ahead to the recapping process. And for those of you that do want to know how to potentially properly maybe open up your PlayStation 2, well, here we go. I'm using a metal tool. Ooh. This thing already kind of has a couple of scratches on it, so. We have removed the feet and screw covers from right here. Now we have two more covers on this corner. I would highly recommend that you use some kind of a plastic tool. That way you don't damage any of this stuff. It's just that I do not have one here in my vicinity at the moment, so this is what we're using. We'll go ahead and set these to the side. As you can clearly see, or maybe you have vision problems, we have 8 screws to remove. So you have 2 short ones right here. Long, long, so long and long right here, short and short right here, long, long, and these are going to be, I believe, one short one and one slightly longer than usual. Nope, also a short one. When it comes to disassembling the shell, I like to lift up from the back like this. So that's what we're going to do here, and then you're going to slightly go forward like this. And then just kind of wiggle. And now you'll have this right here, which is of course the button assembly for the eject and power, and is held down by some tape right here. There are no screws holding this thing down in this area. And you're just prying underneath, that way you can get this out of there. You can see that it was held in by this. And now we unfortunately have to undo this tape. Now you know this console's been opened before. So now that you have the shell removed, we do have a couple of screws that you need to remove. So we can unscrew the controller port. That's 2 screws, and they look like this. You have 1 screw over here holding down the power button assembly. Also the same length. And there's 1 more screw right over here that needs to be removed. Ah, here are the plastic opening tools. I had them in our screwdriver set. I'll have to remember that for next time. All right, so we're gonna have to get a Phillips, a sufficiently sized Phillips. I kind of get the feeling that these screws are out of order. And there is the final screw. So we're now ready to remove the innards of the console out of the shell. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and flip the console over. And we're gonna do that nice and slowly. And you're going to want to have it in this orientation. We can now remove the expansion bay port cover, or you could have removed that before we even did anything with the shell. It's your preference. First, I have to do something about this warranty sticker. I guess X-Acto blade it is, the safest tool available at my disposal at this time. In case you're wondering, there is a plastic groove. That way you can avoid completely scratching up the shell. You don't really get to see it very well, and I kind of don't want to move the console because it's going to start disassembling itself. Essentially what you're wanting to do is cut right here and then straight down this way, and you'll go right into the seams of the plastic of the shell. Now we should be able to take the bottom part of the shell off. There we go, and it'll just lift up like that. This thing definitely needs a little bit of a cleaning. It's not the worst PlayStation 2 I've seen, I'll tell you that much. Now that you've done that, we have this power supply to contend with. Now this thing may have some residual juice, so I do recommend that you discharge this power supply before handling it, unless you know what you're doing. Now you'd have to really take a good look at the power supply to know where the capacitors are, but you can also guess by the giant solder pads here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a quick look this way. You're going to want to be careful. And in case you're wondering, this is the capacitor discharging tool that we have. And I believe this is the capacitor right here that we need to discharge. I'm placing both probes on this capacitor to discharge the capacitor. And there are a few more capacitors on this side to discharge. And it actually looks like we didn't really have any charge left. So we're safe. We can resume disassembly. That's 4 screws holding this power supply in place. You'll notice that the metal is not overlapping this, but the power supply is overlapping the metal when you go to reassemble this console. That is a very important factoid to keep in mind. There are a few ways you can remove this power supply. I tend to keep the whole assembly attached, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this metal piece off. We're going to take this protective film off of the console, and it looks like something, probably age, has already taken care of the fan wires being held down because this paper is no longer sticky. So I've seen it a couple of times, and I may have been guilty of doing this in one of my previous videos, and I've seen quite a bit of people do it as well, and that's pulling the fan connector out by the wires, and well, bad stuff can happen when you do that. So I would recommend you probably use some tweezers or something that'll help pry it out. Just don't use too much force because bad things can happen as well. Now the connector does have grooves, and I don't think I'm going to be able to get a good shot of it, but it should let you wiggle it out by using the grooves. Once again, do not apply too much force this way or this way. You're wanting to place either your pliers or your tweezers flat like I have it right here, and you're pressing down while pressing this way on the grooves, and then it'll dislodge just like that. And that, my friends, is how you prevent ripping wires out of this connector. If any of you have seen my 3DO video, I had to do that for a disk drive, and it was not fun. Now we're going to be removing this, so the fan itself and the power supply all in one assembly. This will of course come out like that. We have this plastic piece which goes over here, which I've never seen in any other models. You just set that to the side. I think at this point it's probably safe to disconnect this, so we're just going to pull this out straight. And there you go. Now we have quite a bit of screws to remove right here. You'll note that these 2 screws are different colored than everything else on this board. So just keep that in mind because they are also longer than all the other screws. Then we're gonna need a fairly small tip. I don't think it's the pH0, but it's gonna be somewhere around there, probably the pH1, 1.5. Perfect. So we're using the pH 1.5. And I do have one more screw to remove after this, so we'll go ahead and show you that in 1 second.
Do you have a console in need of repair or modification? Do you not have a console? Don't fret, we offer repairs and upgrades as well as refurbished ones. For more information, fill out the contact form on our website, nixelectronics.com.
That was a total of 7 screws. Now we have the 2 screws that hold the PMCIA, or I guess a network adapter, hard drive slot, whatever you want to call it. And these are of course different looking than the other screws. The silver ones are machine. They're very finely threaded, and the other one kind of looks like a, I don't know, the threads are a little bit further apart, and of course the screw is longer. Just keep in mind that those 2 screws go right here. Now we have one screw that I forgot to remove, or really I guess I couldn't remove it at the time, and that's this one right here. So when you go to reassemble this console, you'll probably want to put a couple of screws on the metal chassis, and then of course this screw before you put anything else on. So that screw is the same size and type as the other bigger screws. We're going to want to gently flip it over again. And now we do need a pry tool. I'm not going to use a plastic pry tool, I'm going to use a metal one, and we're just going to go like this, right here like that. And you're sticking that in and then prying up that way. And now this entire metal shroud will come right out without a problem, possibly. We'll have to go ahead and pry a little bit. And there you go. And you lift straight up, just like that. And I believe that's all of the screws at this time. Next thing you want to do is safely remove all of these flat cables. Just gently pull out straight. And the same thing with this one right here. And you have another one right here at the bottom for the worm gear. And we have our laser flap right here that you need to lift up. It just lifts up like this. Now, in order to avoid having my fingers get in the way, I'm going to show you using tweezers how this is done. So you just apply a little bit of pressure to the flap right here like that. It lifts open, and then you can pull that out like that. And one final connector to disconnect, the controller. Now this one's almost always disconnecting on its own. If you're one of the fortunate few, you won't have that problem. Now this one, once again, just like the laser, lifts up like that, and then you gently pull it out. It's advisable that you pay attention to the orientation. Obviously you would not want to install it like this. You're going to install it black side facing up. And now we're ready to dislodge the motherboard from the heatsink. This may have a little bit of resistance as there are thermal pads. Now this thing will provide you with a little resistance, and that's due to these thermal pads. And it looks like we need a little bit of a cleaning, but that's not going to be in today's episode. And now that we have our PlayStation 2 completely disassembled, this is what it looks like. I recommend folding over all these flaps right here, that way you don't damage them. And as you can see, we have quite the amount of capacitors to replace on this board. And while you're in here, I do recommend that you replace this battery because most likely it is dead, and it's definitely original because it is Sony branded. Alright, so we're going to be replacing the battery with this, yes I said battery. We're of course now going to have extreme difficulties opening up this package. Come out of there, it's encapsulated. Now I have to use scissors to get this thing out of here. There it goes. We'll be using a capacitor kit from Console 5, but before we progress any further, let's make sure that this capacitor kit actually works with this motherboard. So that's a GH19. Ooh, we have a GH006 through 22, so that should work actually. It's a blanket capacitor kit. I was a little worried there. So replacing this battery, pretty easy. You're going from this side, just prying up a little bit like that. Effortless. Put this right here. We're all good. We have a lot of capacitors to replace on this thing. I don't know that I want to film my entire suffering. I'm fairly confident it's not going to require all these capacitors, but I imagine quite a bit will be required. It'd be nice if I had some kind of a jig that would hold this thing up, sort of like I do for the Xboxes. You know what they say, bigger is better, so let's go ahead and go with this 330 UF 6-volt capacitor right here. If you take a look at this board, at least the quick look that I've done so far, I don't see any orientation markings, so you'll definitely want to pay attention to the orientation for negative and positive. And for this one, we're noting down that negative is on the bottom. And of course, I'm going to use some pliers to twist this thing off. Let's see if that backfires on me on this PlayStation 2, because I did not have any torn traces for the PlayStation 1 console. Was it leaking, or is that flux? Tune in at 11 to find out. So there's our first one. Remember, negative was on the bottom. Okay, we're getting the vacuum going. The soldering iron tip of choice, of course, is going to be this guy right here. Look at that. Nah, just kidding. That's too big. Bigger is not always better. What we will be trying is this one right here, and potentially its little brother, this one right here. And of course, we're going to be using our Hako FX-951, and most likely I'm going to be soldering at 450C. Yes, that is correct. And with any capacitor replacement, the first thing you want to do is of course remove the legs that are on here, which got torn off during the process of using the pliers. Yeah, you can tell this is the ground area because of how much work it is to get these off. So what I like to do is I like to prep each one of these pads. So we'll go ahead and use some desoldering wick to go ahead and do that. And you want it as clean as possible. Yeah, this is definitely ground over here because you can tell how much of a pain it is to clean this side. Now we'll be using some good old-fashioned leaded solder. The internet wants me to call it solder. It's probably a European thing. In case you're wondering on the composition of the solder, that is SN63PB37, which is definitely leaded. Now I'm going to just apply a little bit of solder to this side right here, and I almost feel like I should use an even bigger soldering iron tip. If this thing gives us problems, we'll switch over. Yeah, I think this soldering iron tip is going to be great for soldering, but there is a huge ground plane here because I'm just not able to retain the heat with this soldering iron tip. So unfortunately, we cannot use that soldering iron tip at this time. We're gonna have to default to our T15 D24, or maybe we'll have to go with something even bigger. Ooh. I am not very confident in that joint, so we'll probably touch it up in a second. I just want to get it adhered, so we'll take care of this side right here, which, yeah, as you can tell, looks like it had no issues whatsoever. Now, is that good enough? Yes, it is. I don't recommend you do that unless you're very careful. You could pull up the entire trace. That's one capacitor, and boy oh boy do we have a lot more to go. What I'll do is I'll tackle each capacitor value until we have all the capacitors replaced, and most likely I will also be using a Sharpie to mark each capacitor that has been replaced as well. So we'll start by doing that with this one. Now, of course, we do have flux on this board, so we will be cleaning it after that, and well, that kind of makes using the Sharpie moot, but at least as we replace capacitors, we can know what we replaced and what we did not. So I believe the next ones we'll be replacing are the 220 microfarad, and I believe that's 33 volts if I'm reading that correctly. And in case you're wondering, Console 5 does provide a bit of a chart on how to read the capacitor markings. So if you take a look at this one right here, it is a J, and J is 6.3 volts according to this. Okay, we're looking for all the 220s, 6.3 volts, which I'm assuming is kind of blanket because there's going to be quite a bit of 220s on here that are not 6 volts from what I'm seeing. Well, the kit includes 5 of these capacitors, so we need to find 5. So we have a 220, 2.5 volt right here. However, if you take a look at this board, we have 4 220s right here and a 5th 220 up here. We are only given 5, so we're gonna have to just replace these 5 over here, and negative is on the right hand side. Now it came off a whole lot easier than the other one. Now, you don't need to use the desoldering braid every single time, and the pad that you apply the solder to, I guess, would probably be dependent on whether you're a lefty or a righty. Or if you prefer to work on the ground plane or the voltage plane, I guess. That doesn't look too good. Let's go ahead and take care of this other side first. That is way too much solder. It legitimately looks like it's attached to the side of the capacitor. It's amazing adding more solder took care of the problem. We do need to take that solder shard off. We have these 4, so we'll remove all 4 at once. There's going to be a somewhat cramped area to work in. I already have a feeling it's going to be. Let's go ahead and clean these pads off. Now we'll begin by prepping each one of these pads. So this one's going to be a little bit difficult to solder. So we'll see how we do this. Now it looks like that's mounted securely. We'll do one more before we tackle the other side. All right, right there ought to do. Alright, now to see how we're going to do this. This is arguably going to be the toughest area to solder, aside a couple that are next to the battery. Well, it's there, but it's definitely a very cramped area. We kind of melted a little bit of the capacitor, but that's fine. I guess this is one of those areas where that fancy soldering iron tip I was going to use prior may come in handy. Let's go and give it a shot. Let's anchor this part down first, though. That looks pretty good. All right, let's see if we can replicate that over here. So I really don't like how that globule is just hanging out. That whole area just looks devastated. Some may say it'd be best to probably use hot air to reattach these. I don't know that I agree with that, but I guess if you care how the capacitor looks, right? Yeah, remember to take care of these solder shards. That looks pretty good. Just make sure it's adhered, which it is. This one too, and this one as well. All right, we have one final one. Really feels as if you're performing surgery here with how delicate and tiny this stuff is. Go back to the top and make sure we're good. Looks like we're adhered. I want to touch up just a tad on this bottom joint here. At this point, I think you have an idea of the difficulty in replacing these capacitors and how much work it's going to be. We're going to blast through the remainder of the capacitors that need to be replaced, and then once we're on the final few capacitors, that's when we'll resume filming. So we'll be back. This is all that's left right here, these two capacitors, which are going to get swapped out with these. If you want to take a look at the pile of capacitor carci, they're right over here. Yeah, there's definitely quite a bit of them. It's possible we had at least one or two that were leaking. It's really tough to tell. So let's do this. We have negative on the right-hand side. Any day now. Of course, my main concern is whether these capacitors are even going to fit in this area, but we'll see. Seems to be fairly solid. Now we have this one. Also solid. And we'll touch up the other side. Oh, I am mistaken. So you see, this is why you want to anchor down both sides before you start your touching up. All right, and that should be pretty good. So we'll go ahead and clean this board off with some isopropyl alcohol, 99%. Not that Sony ever did. One thing I do want to note is that these capacitors right here are not part of the kit. I'm assuming it's because they just don't really fail, but yes, that is something to note down. You may also have capacitor remnants that need to be removed, and cleaning the board will of course aid you in determining if you have any shorts that need to be taken care of. So now we'll go ahead and assemble this board partially, that way we can power it on. See if this thing bursts into flames. I guess this AV port is a little loose, so I have to hold it up. Yeah, this AV port is definitely a little loose. Perhaps some deoxit would help it. You don't want to run your PlayStation 2 in this condition for too long without the heat sinks. Now we have something to hold up the AV cable. Let's go ahead and see. And there we are. And we've just completed a successful recapping on this console. I'm not going to bore you with the process of reassembling this thing, as well you can refer to the beginning of this video if you want to do that. Watch it in reverse. If you found this video helpful or useful, please remember to leave us a like and subscribe, and thanks for watching. Until next time.